The air in the lab was cold, sterile, carrying the faint hum of a machine processing a brain it would never understand. A single thought, a flicker of recognition, a memory surfacing from the depths of a lifetime. That act, invisible to the outside world, consumes a specific amount of biological energy. Your brain, the organ that defines you, burns roughly 20 watts of energy just to sustain consciousness. That number is not a metaphor. It is a metabolic reality, measured and confirmed by generations of neuroscientists who have mapped the electrical storm inside your skull. Now, consider what your grandfather's brain was doing at the same age. Not your grandfather as a young man in a retirement home, but your grandfather in his 40s, in a world without a constant stream of notifications, without a screen flickering in his peripheral vision for 12 hours a day. His brain processed visual information at the same biological bandwidth as yours, roughly 60 bits per second for conscious visual input. That number has not changed in 50,000 years. But here is the difference. His brain was optimized by a lifetime of synaptic pruning, a process where unused neural connections are trimmed away to make the remaining ones faster, more efficient. Your brain, in contrast, is drowning in unused connections, kept alive by a constant flood of novelty and distraction. This is the hidden cost of the modern environment, and it is worse than you think. The hardware in your skull, the same hardware your ancestors used to track prey across savannas and remember the locations of life-saving water sources, is running degraded code. You are not slower because you are older. You are slower because your brain has been hijacked by a mechanism that was never designed for the world you live in. The circuit is ancient and it is running you. Or that moment of recognition, realizing the metric you've been measuring yourself against was never fair. That is the first crack in the false belief. If that unsettled something you felt but never named, subscribe. This channel exists to expose the biological architecture behind those experiences. And the next piece of the puzzle is about to shift your understanding again. In the comments, drop a single word for the feeling that just landed. Degraded or relieved. I want to see which one more of you chose first. Here's what nobody talks about. The human brain evolved in an environment of scarcity and intermittent threat. Your ancestors lived in small bands of around 25 individuals, a scale that optimized cooperation while limiting competition. Their cortisol levels spiked only in response to genuine physical danger. A predator, a rival band, a scarcity of food. When the threat passed, the stress response shut down. The amygdala, that ancient alarm system, was designed for short bursts, not a constant low-level hum. The problem is not that you have an amygdala. The problem is that it is being triggered by things that are not threats, and it never fully turns off. In 1950, a psychologist at the University of Minnesota ran a simple experiment. He asked subjects to sit in a quiet room for as long as they could, with nothing to do. No books, no phones, no distractions. Just a chair, their own thoughts, and the hum of silence. The average length of time before they rang the bell to end the experiment was less than 4 minutes. 4 minutes of being alone with their own minds. That was over 70 years ago, before the internet, before the smartphone, before social media. Today, the same experiment yields an average threshold of under 90 seconds. The human brain, left without external stimulation, now becomes uncomfortable, faster than at any point in recorded history. But here's the thing, that discomfort is not a bug. It is a signal. Your brain is telling you something important about the environment it is trapped in. The mechanism that makes you reach for your phone when you are bored is the same mechanism that once made your ancestors scan the horizon for predators. It is a survival circuit, repurposed by an environment that has no predators but infinite novelty. And that is where the inversion happens. That signal you felt reading those 90 seconds. The quiet alarm that said something was wrong is the same circuit this channel is designed to decode. If you want to keep following this thread through the hard data and into the protocols that actually rewire the system, subscribe. The next video maps the exact pathway from that internal alarm back to the amygdala, and it changes how you interpret every distraction from here on. In the comments, tell me your number. How long do you think you could sit in that chair right now? No phone, no book, just silence. Answer honestly. The data only matters if we start with where we actually are. If you've ever opened a document to work and spent 40 minutes on your phone instead, you know the feeling of your own brain fighting you in real time. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are running ancestral code in a modern environment, and the code is misfiring. The part of your brain that should be focused on long-term goals is being outcompeted by a system that rewards immediate, shallow novelty. The reward circuit, the dopamine pathway, the neural loop that once reinforced behaviors essential for survival, is now being hijacked by a notification ping. The Baltimore longitudinal study of aging, one of the longest-running studies of human aging in the world, has been following the same cohort of subjects for over 60 years. The data is unambiguous. The hippocampus, the region of the brain responsible for memory consolidation and spatial navigation, is shrinking faster in modern populations than it did in previous generations at the same age. The researchers controlled for diet, exercise, and genetic factors. The variable that explained the difference was not aging. It was the modern information environment. Your hippocampus is losing volume because it is not being used the way evolution designed it to be used. You do not need to remember a path through the forest when your phone guides you. You do not need to encode the location of a water source when Google Maps shows it instantly. The brain prunes what it does not use, and you are not using your memory the way your ancestors did. This is where it gets strange. The same process that is shrinking your hippocampus is simultaneously overdeveloping your reward circuitry. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, impulse control, and long-term planning, is being outcompeted by the limbic system, the ancient emotional brain that cares only about immediate pleasure and immediate threat. A 2019 fMRI study conducted at Stanford tracked prefrontal cortex activation in subjects during acute stress. The subjects who showed the highest prefrontal activation were those who had the lowest lifetime exposure to high-frequency digital media. The ones who could not resist checking their phones during the study had less gray matter in the precise region needed to resist the urge. The hardware itself was changing. Remember those beautiful mice from the Federet Alomboito-9 study in the Journal of Neuroscience? The researchers subjected mice to chronic social defeat stress, a model of prolonged psychological threat. The ones that became susceptible to the stress, the ones that withdrew, showed anxiety, lost social interest, had a specific neural signature. Their ventral tegmental area, the dopamine production center, was firing at an elevated baseline. The same thing is happening in your prefrontal cortex. The same mechanism that made those mice retreat from social interaction is making you reach for your phone when you should be working. The circuit is conserved across species, and it is being activated by a notification ping. The part almost nobody quotes from the Heinrichs et al. 2003 study in PNAS is not just that oxytocin reduced cortisol by 23%. It is that the effect was strongest in subjects who had a history of secure social bonds. The resilience was not in the molecule alone. It was in the learned association between safety and connection. Your ancestors built that association through thousands of hours of face-to-face interaction within a stable band of 25 people. You are building it through a screen with people whose faces you will never see. The biological mechanism is the same. The environment is different, and the environment is winning. And this is where the doctor revealed something completely unexpected. The comparative ethnography of the Kung and Hadza foragers, two of the last remaining hunter-gatherer populations on Earth, measured cortisol levels repeatedly over the course of 2 decades, despite living in environments that modern medicine would classify as high stress, constant threat of predation, scarcity of food, lack of modern medical care. Their baseline cortisol levels were lower than the average office worker in a developed country. Lower than yours. The researchers expected to find evidence of chronic stress. They found the opposite. The noise in their environment was real, but it was intermittent. The noise in yours is constant, and it is invisible. You have felt it, the sensation of noise drowning out your real thoughts. That feeling is your reward circuit misfiring, running ancestral code in a modern environment. The loop is simple. A notification appears. Your brain releases a small pulse of dopamine. You feel a brief moment of anticipation. You check the notification. The dopamine drops. The circuit is now stronger. The next notification will be harder to resist. The loop repeats thousands of times per day. Each repetition reinforces a neural pathway that is slowly dismantling the one you need to focus. But here's what they didn't expect. The brain is plastic. It can rewire itself. But it only rewires in response to demand. If you stop demanding focus, the focus circuits weaken. If you stop demanding memory consolidation, the hippocampus shrinks. If you stop demanding sustained attention, the prefrontal cortex becomes less efficient. The degradation is not a disease. It is a training effect. You are training your brain to be distracted. And like any training, it works. The continuous performance tests, a standard measure of sustained attention used by psychologists since the 1950s, have been administered to cohort after cohort over the decades. The data from the 2020s shows a clear decline in average performance compared to the 1990s, controlling for age, education, and IQ. The average subject today makes more errors of omission, missing a target they should have detected, than the average subject 30 years ago. The same study that shows this decline also shows an increase in errors of commission, responding to a target that was not there. You are not just missing more. You are seeing things that are not there. The EEG recordings during infinite scroll versus resting state tell the same story. When you are engaged in passive high-frequency scrolling, your brain waves shift from a pattern associated with focused attention to a pattern associated with daydreaming and automatic processing. The prefrontal cortex goes quiet. The limbic system takes over. You are not processing information. You are being processed by the interfaces. The fMRI studies of the prefrontal cortex under acute stress show that the same region that enables self-control literally dims when cortisol levels rise. The inhibition circuits, the ones that stop you from acting on impulse, are the most metabolically expensive in the brain. They require the most glucose. They fatigue the fastest. When they fatigue, the ancient circuits take over. The amygdala sends a signal. Do something, anything, to reduce the uncertainty. And your brain, desperate for relief, reaches for the phone. The mechanism is elegant in its cruelty. The stress response evolved to protect you from immediate physical danger. It floods your system with cortisol, sharpens your senses, redirects energy from long-term maintenance to short-term survival. In a true emergency, this is life-saving. In a modern office, surrounded by tasks that require sustained cognitive effort, it is debilitating. The same cortisol that helps you escape a predator makes it impossible to write a report. The same adrenaline that sharpens your reflexes in a crisis makes you check social media during a deadline. The biology is ancient. The environment is new, and the mismatch is destroying your focus. If this made sense instantly, it is because you already knew it. You have felt the difference between a focused hour of deep work and a fragmented afternoon of shallow tasks. You have known, somewhere beneath the shame, that the problem was not you. It was the circuit. And now you are seeing the circuit clearly for the first time. Write this in the comments. The moment you realized the degradation was not your fault. The moment the shame lifted. The moment you saw the glitch in the system. That moment matters. It is the beginning of the rewire. The loop is not your fault. It is your grandfather's ghost in your hardware. The brain you inherited was designed for a world that no longer exists. But now that you see the circuit, you have the choice to rewire it. The next video in this series shows you the first protocol, the precise neural exercise that begins dismantling the loop and restoring the prefrontal cortex to its natural dominance. It is not a hack, it is a biological intervention. Rooted in the same plasticity that allowed your ancestors to adapt to every environment they ever faced. The exposure of that ghost is the fulcrum this entire series turns on. If you have felt your own brain degrade in ways you could not explain, and you want to see the other side, the recovery trajectory the data actually supports, subscribe. The channel follows the science from diagnosis to intervention, and the next installment delivers the first concrete protocol, not a suggestion, but a biological instruction. In the comments, write the word that followed the shame lifting. Freedom, clarity, relief, or something else. I want to see which one the data here produces. Your brain has been hijacked, but the hijacker is not an external enemy. It is your own survival circuitry responding to an environment it never evolved to navigate. The shame you carried, the belief that you were somehow weaker, slower, less capable than those who came before, was never yours to carry. It belonged to a mechanism that was working exactly as designed in a world that no longer matches the design specs. The data from the Baltimore longitudinal study, the fMRI scans at Stanford, the cortisol measurements among the Kung, the continuous performance tests across 70 years, they all point to the same conclusion. You are not broken. Your brain is running ancient code in a modern environment, and the code is perfectly adapted to a world that no longer exists. The degradation you feel is not a personal failure. It is a species-level mismatch, measured and confirmed by every tool neuroscience has developed. Here is what that means for the screen in front of you. The same plasticity that allowed your ancestors to adapt to ice ages, desert expansions, and the transition from hunting to agriculture is still running in your neural architecture. The brain that is being degraded by the modern information environment is the same brain that can be restored. The mechanism that makes you reach for your phone is the same mechanism that can be retrained to sustain attention for hours. The loop that is dismantling your focus can be rewired, but only if you understand the circuit. The knowledge you carry now changes the signal. The next time your hand moves toward the phone during a moment of boredom, you will know what is happening. The amygdala is not sensing a predator. It is sensing the absence of novelty, which your ancestral brain learned to interpret as safety. The discomfort you feel is not a threat. It is the quiet of a world without predators, a silence your ancestors would have welcomed. You have been trained to fear that silence, but now you see the glitch, and that is the rewire. Not through an app, not through a meditation practice, not through willpower alone. Through the quiet, precise act of recognizing the circuit as it fires and choosing in that moment to let it fire without response. The urge to check, the spike of anticipation, the pull toward the screen. You see it now for what it is, a ghost in your hardware, running code from a world that vanished long before you were born. The first time you let that urge pass without acting on it, the circuit weakens. The second time, it weakens further. The prefrontal cortex, starved of demand for years, begins to strengthen its connections. The inhibition circuits rebuild. The hippocampus, that ancient memory center, begins to recover its volume. The process is slow, invisible, and biological, but it is real. And it begins not with a productivity hack or a digital detox, but with the simple, radical act of seeing the circuit clearly. Your grandfather's brain wasn't faster because he was genetically superior. It was faster because his environment demanded it. The synaptic pruning that made his neural pathways efficient happened automatically through a lifetime of sustained attention and real-world problem solving. Your brain can achieve the same pruning, but it requires a deliberate choice to starve the circuits you do not want and feed the circuits you do. The demand must come from you. The environment will not provide it. This is the hidden cost of modern life, laid bare by the same science that once celebrated the progress. You are not smarter than your ancestors. Your hardware is objectively slower, but the degradation is reversible, and the reversal begins the moment you stop blaming yourself and start seeing the circuit for what it is. Not a personal failure, a biological inheritance, running in a world it was never designed for. The moment that reversal completes, the moment the blame shifts from you to the environment, is the moment the entire dynamic changes. If you are ready to see where that shift leads, subscribe so you receive the final piece of this series. It is not a motivational conclusion. It is a structural one, grounded in the same data that exposed the degradation in the first place. In the comments, leave the one word that will anchor your rewire, the word you will return to when the urge to check fires again. Mine is circuit. What is yours? You are never the glitch. The environment is the glitch. And now that you see it, you are no longer running on instinct alone. You are running on awareness. That changes everything. The circuit you now see is not confined to the small screen in your pocket. It radiates outward into every structure of modern life. The open plan office designed for interruption, the news cycle calibrated for outrage, the social feed optimized for compulsive checking. Each one is a variation on the same biological exploit. Hijack the ancient reward pathway, trigger the cortisol response, weaken the prefrontal cortex, deepen the loop. The environment is not neutral. It is engineered to keep the circuit running, because a brain caught in the loop is predictable, tractable, and profitable. But the loop has a vulnerability. It requires your ignorance to sustain itself. The moment you see the mechanism, the moment you recognize the spike of anticipation as an artifact of ancestral code rather than a genuine need, the circuit loses its invisible power. You cannot unsee the glitch. And that is the point of no return. The data from the continuous performance tests across 70 years shows a clear trajectory. The average human capacity for sustained attention has been declining steadily, generation by generation. But the same data contains a hidden signal. The subjects who scored highest were not the ones with the strongest willpower. They were the ones who had structured their environment to minimize interruption in the first place. The resistance was not individual, it was architectural. The rewire begins not with the heroic act of self-control in the face of temptation, but with the quiet decision to stop placing the temptation in your path. The Kung foragers did not have stronger prefrontal cortexes than you do. Their environment did not demand constant vigilance against a notification ping. The silence they carried was not an achievement. It was a baseline, a gift of an environment that matched the brain's design specifications. Your environment does not give you that gift. You must build it yourself, not through discipline alone, but through the deliberate construction of spaces where the ancient circuits can rest. The fMRI study at Stanford showed something else the researchers did not emphasize in the press release. The subjects who had the highest prefrontal activation during acute stress were not the ones who meditated daily or practiced mindfulness. They were the ones who had the lowest lifetime exposure to high-frequency task switching. The protection was cumulative. Every hour of sustained, uninterrupted focus was a deposit into a neural account that would pay out when the stress hit. The same is true for you. Every moment you choose to let the urge pass without response is a deposit into the same account. The mice from the Fidel study had a second group that the researchers did not focus on. The resilient mice, the ones that did not develop the stress-induced neural signature, shared a common pattern. They had been exposed to intermittent, predictable challenges followed by periods of recovery. The brain learned that the challenge would end. The cortisol system learned to shut down. The circuit learned resilience through rhythm. The same rhythm is available to you, not through a constant battle against distraction, but through the deliberate alternation of focused demand and genuine recovery. The shame you felt was the last piece of the trap. It kept you looking inward for a solution that did not exist inside you. The problem was never your willpower. It was the environment you trusted, the devices you welcomed into your hands, the platforms you believed were tools of empowerment. They were not. They were interfaces designed to capture the most ancient and vulnerable circuit in your brain. And they succeeded because no one told you the circuit existed. Now you know. The amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the ventral tegmental area, the cortisol feedback loop, the dopamine reward pathway. These are not abstract terms from a textbook. They are the architecture of every distraction, every loss of focus, every moment of mental fog you have ever experienced. The language of the circuit is the language of your own experience, translated into the terms of biology. And biology, unlike shame, offers a path forward. The path is simple, which is not the same as easy. It begins with the recognition that the circuit requires novelty to sustain itself. Deprive it of novelty, and the weakening begins. The first hour without a notification. And the first morning without reaching for the screen. The first moment of boredom that you sit through without relief. Each one is a small death of the old loop and a small birth of the new one. The brain does not know the difference between a predator and a notification, but it does know the difference between a circuit that fires and a circuit that starves. Your grandfather's brain was not a relic of a lost golden age. It was a biological system operating at its natural efficiency within a matching environment. The same system is inside your skull right now, slowed by the very tools you were told would make you faster. The inversion is complete. The irony is bitter. And the knowledge of it is the only key that fits the lock. The mechanism is not your enemy. It is your inheritance, an ancient gift from ancestors who survived ice ages and predators and famines by trusting the same circuits that are now pulling you toward the screen. The gift is still intact. It has simply been rerouted by an environment that does not deserve your trust. Now that you see the circuit, you can choose where to direct it. You were never the glitch. You were never broken. The degradation you felt was the cost of living in a world that was designed before anyone understood the circuit. But now you understand, and understanding is the rewire itself. The moment the shame lifted, the moment you recognized that your struggle was not a personal failure but a species-level mismatch, that moment was the first step out of the loop. The rest is just repetition, practice, the slow accumulation of deposits into a neural account that will pay out when you need it most. The circuit is visible, the path is clear, the choice is yours, and it is the only one that matters.